perfect example. One of the things that we found, we looked at 37 state employees who had applied for unemployment. And we found, I think, if I remember correctly, I think there were 16 of those that just of that sample. We don't know, there may be more that receiving unemployment that weren't supposed to. 10 of those were from the Office of Unemployment Insurance who knew better. And that we found 10 that had from the Office of Unemployment Insurance not only applied for it when they were not supposed to, they also accessed their own claims, even though they were specifically trained not to access their own claims.
And welcome, everybody, to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and today we have State Auditor Mike Harmon here with us to discuss what the auditor does, his term in office, and what he's been seeing here recently. And of course, we'll probably have some fun talking about a number of other items. But before we dig into that, please like, comment, share, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Facebook or YouTube or Rumble or Twitter, and you want to be able to take it on the go and listen in your car, as always, you can listen on any major podcasting platform. You can listen on Spotify, Apple, really just any choice you want to listen to there. And if you can't find us on somewhere, let me know and I'll make sure we get there. But without further ado, we have Auditor Harmon here with us. Auditor, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing, Andrew?
Awesome. I can't complain. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a very busy time. You're very busy in general, but thank you for giving me and constituents some time to hear from you.
Well, you are welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to your constituents.
They vote for you too. Yeah, exactly. They vote for you too. There you
go.
Exactly. So first, for anybody who's confused, what is it that if is, I guess, in a few minutes, as best you can,
sure,
describe what the auditor does?
Well, a lot of times when you say the auditor, people kind of freak out a little bit. It's like, well, I paid my taxes, so don't worry about it. It's like, no, that's not what we do. We're actually the people's auditor. We make sure that government, or do the best we can to make sure government is efficient, effective, and ethical. For instance, we audit, of course, every year, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a little bit, I think, but we audit the state every year. Basically, the executive branch puts out which is known as the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. We audit that, and then we issue a letter on that, but we also issue 2 audit reports, the Statewide Single Audit of Kentucky, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 deals more specifically with the financial statement and controls. Volume 2 deals more with federal compliance. But that's not all we do. We also audit counties. We audit fiscal courts. Now, for fiscal courts, they have to have an audit, financial statement audit every year, but we ourselves will generally do that audit once every 3, once every 4 years. We audit the sheriffs and the county clerks every year. We audit, we have a special exam division where we do special exams. For instance, one of the first ones that I did when I entered the auditor's office was Kentucky Law Enforcement Foundation Program Fund, to make sure that tax dollars that are intended for law enforcement actually make it to law enforcement. And we also did the University of Louisville, a governance exam of the University of Louisville Foundation and the University of Louisville. So we've been very busy with everything. But as I said, we are the people's auditor.
So you don't just do money. You also make sure that places follow the law too, as well, especially process law. And I know there's been a few times where that's happened. Over the last, you're coming up on the end of your term. You've been in for almost 8 years now.
I've gone by fast.
What has been the most shocking thing your office has uncovered, in your opinion, since you've been there?
Well, there's so many. You know, when we did the government exam of the,
I don't think that's what we want to hear. When I say what's the most shocking thing, you're like, so many. Oh my God.
So many. Well, you know, most people, and I've said this before, 95% of the people that we audit, if they do have a finding, it's usually more along the lines of, like you said, a process law where maybe they're not following good controls, they're not following something like that. But, we have found people that, for lack of a better word, been stealing. But some of the things that shocked me, like when we did the University of Louisville governance exam, to have a $1 billion foundation not have a budget to actual. Our church was a smaller church. We have a budget to actual, so you would think that they would. They didn't do any training for their board members.
So for those of you who don't, for those of our listeners that don't understand the lingo there,
yes.
I know I hear that, and I hear a $1 billion organization doesn't budget their money. But can you elaborate exactly on why that's so shocking?
Well, it's shocking because, whenever you're doing budgets, obviously you have a breakdown of your expenses, you have a breakdown of your expected revenues. And as you go through month by month by month, you've got to compare those because if you spend too much money, well, you're going to run out of money.
Sure.
But also if there's things that you need that you're supposed to purchase with that you don't, well, that can be problematic as well. So that was concern when we did the special exam of county attorneys, which when I came in, we are not mandated. We can, but we're not mandated to do audit county attorneys. But I've had a lot of people over the years have concerns. They say, well, why don't y'all go in and audit county attorneys? So we did do a special exam of county attorneys. We picked 9. We started with a survey of 16. We picked 9. We went in and did the special exam. We had 3 referrals of offices. They weren't all the county attorney themselves, but 3 county attorneys there. One of them was, and this is the one I always use when people say, oh, you're elected as a Republican, the only thing you do is, attack Democrats. Well, we don't attack anybody. We just follow the data. But we have had referrals on Republicans and Democrats alike, and one of those was former Lawrence County attorney.
Referrals
to law enforcement. They can be other things. It can be Treasury. It can be, other things.
So that's when you find they've done something wrong that needs to be elevated beyond saying, hey, you need to get this fixed. It's crossing into a realm of possibly criminal behavior.
Exactly. Now, sometimes we do a referral and nothing happens, but a lot of times it does. So, for instance, in this particular case, we referred it to the FBI. FBI did further investigation, and they ended up finding, I think by the time it was done, they found even more because we only did 2 years, and they went further back. What we found was that the county attorney or former county attorney was basically providing his wife with $60,000 a year plus bonuses on top of her $40,000 a year salary.
So the county attorney,
yes,
hired his wife,
yes,
and paid her $40,000 a year salary,
yes,
and then paid her another $60,000 a year in bonuses,
yes. Which there's so many problems with that. The first one being
really,
yes. I know it's hard to believe, but that is hard to believe. But for instance, Section 3 of the Kentucky Constitution prohibits bonuses anyway. There's a few exceptions because it's supposed to be, specifically for work and planned out. But you're not. The interpretation of the Section 3 of Kentucky Constitution is bonuses are not to be paid. So that in and of itself was problematic. Then obviously paying his wife so much. Now, what is interesting, he also paid just a little bit bonuses to some of his other staff, but by comparison, all the bonuses he paid out during that 2-year period, 94% of them went to his wife. So, for instance, there was one assistant county attorney that got a little over, I think it was $2,100, maybe $2,200 in that same 2-year period, and another county attorney.
What was his wife's title?
Let's see. I think she was like the office secretary was her title. So she wasn't an assistant county attorney. She was just basically an office assistant, office secretary. But he said that her work was invaluable, which, Might have been, but
well, apparently it's worth about $100,000. He put a price on it, clearly.
Yes. Well, now the one thing that I didn't cover was when the FBI looked at it, they went further back. I did mention that, but I didn't mention what they found. They actually found like $373,000. And then they also found that he had been over.
How long?
I think they went back to 2013, I think.
So it was like 2013 to
probably 20. I think at that time it was probably I think we went through like 2021. So 8 or 9 year period, maybe a little less.
Okay, so in 8 to 9 years, less than 10 years.
Yes.
He had paid over
$300,000. Yes, almost
$400,000 to his wife.
Yes,
in bonuses from the taxpayer.
In bonuses on top of her salary.
On top of her $40,000 a year salary.
Yes. Now, after that referral, the FBI also did some additional digging, and they also found that he was he was overbilling child support because, generally not all, but most county attorneys actually do the child support enforcement.
And then they collect a finder's fee off that enforcement.
Well, generally
an administrative fee, I guess.
An administrative fee that's actually the child support enforcement is actually paid through federal dollars, which is still your tax dollars, but through federal dollars, whereas the child support they recover, actually all of that is supposed to go to the person that's supposed to receive it.
Okay, gotcha. So the office is in charge of collecting it. Their bills are paid for by the federal government. And then the person they're supposed to give it to, all the money they receive is supposed to go to the mother.
Correct.
But they were over
or father. It's generally
or father. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But they would jack up the numbers and then shave a little off the top.
No, they would jack up the number of hours. They would turn because they were paid by the number of hours
by the federal government.
To the federal government, yes.
And so they were stealing from the federal government.
Yes, which means they're stealing from you and I.
Yeah. So once again, I mean, rigmarole. They're stealing from us one way or another.
Yes.
But so on top of the bonuses, he was then stealing from the federal government and us by overcharging hours to collect child support. Was this to make his books work for how much money he was paying his wife?
It was basically the bonuses he was paying his wife was actually coming out of other areas that he was collecting, tax dollars in that regards, collections on certain things, code checks.
Maybe we're just giving our county attorneys too much money. I mean, if they've got it laying around where nobody noticed for 10 years that he's shaving, $400K in bonuses plus salary. So that's $80,000 a year off the top.
Yeah, he was, thankfully, I truly believe he was the exception more than the rule.
We'd hope, certainly.
Yes. Well, of the 9 we saw, there were minor things with some of them, but no theft along that lines. The exception was in Gallatin County. We did a referral on that one. We haven't heard anything that's happened from that one. But basically, you had a situation where they were doing some of their personal expenses out of it, but supposedly they were going to pay it back, and they'd paid some of it back, but they hadn't paid all of it back. But it was interesting when we did that one, the wife actually took the credit card statement that they were using to pay, and she actually went through and marked P and O, P being personal, O being office. So in that particular case, she made it easy. But my favorite one was the Boyd County. And this wasn't the county attorney. This was the child support enforcement officer there in the Boyd County attorney. As I understand it, our auditors just went in. They just said, we want checking accounts. The next day, the child support enforcement officer came with the checking accounts to the county attorney and said, well, I know why they're here. I know why the auditor's here. I've been stealing. Well, we didn't know she had been stealing. We probably would have figured it out, but we didn't know that she had been stealing.
How much did she steal?
What was it? When we looked at it, I'm wanting to say about $60,000.
How long has she been in office, or how long has she been in that role?
Well, she had been working for it. Now, we was just for 2 years. Once again, I think others went further back.
So in 2 years, she stole 60 grandish.
If I remember correctly, I'd have to go back on that one. I'll have to remember, but it was substantial. It was, substantial.
I know why they're here. I've been stealing.
And my numbers may be a little bit off in the Boyd County one, but I think it was somewhere in that range. But anyway, when they went back, or other people went back, because that one, the county attorney turned it over to the state police. And of course, we did additional referrals once we had finished. But now I tell everybody, that was kind of like our Perry Mason moment. We just ask a few questions and she cracks. But I told that to one of our new auditors, and one of our new auditors ended up telling me that she asked me, she's like, well, who's Perry Mason? So I felt real old. You may not know who Perry Mason is. You may be so young as well, but I felt old that somebody didn't know that. Of course, I am the oldest currently serving constitutional officer in Kentucky by 10 years. So
yeah. No. I remember that from your speeches around,
Yes.
So that's some of the interesting findings you've had. Now you do a audit of the state government as a whole every
Correct.
year. I know there's been some things I think the general public has been shocked to hear from that, but what are some of the findings you've just seen from our state government? Just kind of some of these actions that have just really, in your opinion, been out of line, or absolutely, things you've had to refer, and what's going on with those? Sure.
Well, as indicated, the statewide single audit of Kentucky, or what we call the SWAC, we release volume 1, volume 2 each year. And as you and I both know, when current Governor Andy Beshear came in, of course, COVID hit, and he shut, everything down. Well, he didn't shut everything down. He picked and chose winners, as it were, and losers. And so there was a lot of things that happened, especially in that first year. Beginning shutting down in March of a lot of businesses. And by the way, we appreciate your efforts to stay open in that regards and fight that good fight. But
thank you for the support.
Yes. And there was close to, in 1 week in March, there was close to 50,000. It was little under $50,000 and 50,000 people in unemployment claims. And then the following week, there's about 113,000. So you had close to, almost, 175, 200,000 unemployment claims in 2 weeks, period. And the other thing he did, it was terrible, in addition to shutting everything down except your big boxes. But obviously shut down churches, shut down things that all you and I both disagree with doing any of that. But he also shut down the in-person unemployment offices, which in a time when people desperately needed unemployment, he basically was channeling everything through the phone and online. And that's problematic, because you can imagine, a 10-lane highway being narrowed to 1 or 2 lanes, you're going to have problems. Well,
I always thought it was just simply I just don't think I was told that the unemployment offices found out that they were going to have lines out the door of people. Wow, Lord, lines on the phone at the same time we all did. There was no heads up given to them before he came out there. And of course, there's a lot of things going on with unemployment. I know we'll dig more into it.
Sure.
But one of the things that crossed my mind, and you as auditor you probably know a lot more about what the laws are, but the big slowdown for unemployment, of course, is that the employer has 10 days. A letter gets sent out, and the employer responds to that letter saying whether they approve of the employment or don't approve. I think a simple process for employers to say, look, I know I'm about to lay off 100 people or 10 people. And they can call up to the unemployment office and say, or whether it's an online portal that you could whip up real quick, because this wouldn't be hard, put in your employees' names, their socials, maybe do a call with them to prove your identity and submit your identity documents and say, I'm the business owner, I'm the manager, I'm approved to do this, I have the approval from them. Here's a list of social security numbers and names with what I'm approving that they were getting paid. And so that way, when their claim comes in, you can just auto approve it. You don't need to have these 10-day hold up. I always thought that would be an easy, simple, straightforward solution to quickly solve it. I don't know if that was against the law or if it's just that because I'm a business owner and I've been through the process before and I immediately could see how to save 10 days of time off every single person. I don't know. Would that be a solution that would be worth exploring at that time?
It would have been. What they actually did is an effort to get money out as quickly as possible. They put in place what they call auto pay, and they put that in place really despite many of the objections of long-term, Office of Unemployment Insurance people. And one of the reasons they objected was what they were doing was not only violating federal law and federal statute, but they were also taking key controls off.
So they were just automatically approving claims that came in without the 10 days?
Very, very quickly. There were some very minor things that they ran through, but they took off key controls about, like you said, verification, to making sure the person that was sending it in was sending in. And there was hundreds of millions of dollars of not necessarily all fraud, but a lot of it, we think a lot of it was fraud, but things that you just couldn't verify. And it was so bad. I mean, it was so bad how many that they didn't even know how much unemployment they still owed. When we did it, there's a process that when you close out your books, you're supposed to notify the auditors of estimated liabilities. Well, one of the things that they did, they didn't realize they were supposed to do that for us with unemployment, but when they gave us so many variants in numbers. I mean, it ranged everywhere from 8 or 9 million up to 2.08 billion. And we kept going back and saying, no, you forgot to do this. You forgot to do this. You forgot to do this. Well, that was one of the first times that we had to give the annual comprehensive financial report. We couldn't give them a clean audit. We had to provide them with, an audit that, was less than perfect. In that regard, standard commentary there.
Well, and I think too as well, an important fact for people listening and everybody else to understand is that money isn't federal dollars. It isn't general tax dollars either.
Right.
Unemployment funds are paid by the employers.
Yeah.
In a way, well, directly by the employers, in a way, kind of the employees, because you're paying a percentage based upon, your payroll size. And there's a lot of other factors.
And the regular unemployment, that is true. There were also, I think it was 4 different unemployment sets that were created, federal dollars. There was what they called the federal pandemic. Basically you had your standard.
They had like a $300 a week kicker.
Well, it started out at $600 a week.
More money than a lot of people are probably making.
And a lot of people that more money are making, and definitely more that they would make in standard unemployment. So you basically had your traditional unemployment. You had unemployment for people who had exhausted traditional unemployment. You had unemployment for the first time for people that wouldn't normally fit the standard, basically self-employed, things like that, economy. And then you had the additional bump, what they call the FPUP.
Well, and Kentucky, I believe, had already the highest, one of the highest maximum amounts you can receive.
Right.
So, it's a percentage based on what you're being paid, of course. But like Kentucky's was like $600 or something is the max you can receive.
Yeah, that was the federal pandemic unemployment compensation.
And like when you stacked them, though, Kentucky ended up, because other states like Tennessee may limit it to like $300 a week is the most you can receive on unemployment.
Right.
And so that stacking, Kentucky really got hurt in that way. That's something, I think that's just something for people to understand as we're talking about why this mishandling of unemployment is so severe.
And it was tough in 2 reasons. One, you had people receiving unemployment that shouldn't receive unemployment, and you had people that needed unemployment because they were put out of work. A lot of them wasn't getting it. Perfect example. One of the things that we found, we looked at 37 state employees who had applied for unemployment. And we found, I think, if I remember correctly, I think there were 16 of those that just of that sample. We don't know, there may be more that were receiving unemployment that weren't supposed to. 10 of those were from the Office of Unemployment Insurance, who knew better. And we found 10 that had from the Office of Unemployment Insurance not only applied for it when they were not supposed to, they also accessed their own claims, even though they were specifically trained not to access their own claims. In that particular case, we referred that one to the Office of Attorney General.
Are you familiar with Jacqueline Coleman, Lieutenant Governor at the time?
Yes.
The requesting people to be jumped ahead. Was that something that came up in your audit? Or?
That was not actually in the audit itself, but I was familiar with it through other sources where they had done open records request. And so I am familiar with it. Yes. Unfortunately.
Anything else you found in your general, we talked a lot about unemployment there.
Well,
you've seen a lot of?
The other thing that I talked about a lot, and which is really kind of tragic, there was 400,000 emails that was sent to the unemployment assistant line, really at a time when people needed unemployment, people had concerns about unemployment, and they just archived them. They didn't even bother reading them. Now, when the governor was confronted with that news, he basically indicated that, well, he was sure that they weren't 400,000 unique individuals. Well, that may or may not be the case. You could have opened them and figured it out, but
so is 50,000 okay?
So is 50,000 okay? Is 100,000 okay? Unique individuals. So needless to say, they dropped the ball substantially. But the big thing that they did that really started off poorly was that auto pay, because that auto pay caused them to get so far behind and so many things confused and conflated that, I'm not sure they've still recovered yet. We were finding instances of fraud even in the following years, statewide single audit of Kentucky. So there's a lot of work ahead of them. There's many, many more things than that. And I encourage people to go to auditor.ky.gov and take a look at all our audits, but definitely look at the last couple of years, the last 3 years of the statewide single audit.
One thing in your audits that's always stood out to me recently and in the past is, I guess I've noticed it more under the Beshear administration, is the sheer amount of unreported data breaches or slow reported data breaches where they're not following the law as far as how they're supposed to report that. What's kind of been going on there?
Well, and that one that particular item did show up in that first year's statewide single audit of Kentucky right after the pandemic, the 2020. And that was one of the things we addressed at that time. There were 3 data breaches that not only did they not get reported or slow reported, we didn't even find out about them until a month after they occurred. There's a law on the books. It was actually put forth by the previous auditor in 2014. I actually voted for it, that if there's a data breach within the government, they're supposed to notify the auditor, the attorney general, a couple other agencies, and also notify the individuals that it was occurring. Well, there was a breach in the Office of Unemployment Insurance, 3 separate ones, and they didn't report to us. And actually, the only reason we found out about it is because my understanding is the Attorney General's office found out about it, and then the press found out about it. I don't know which found out first, but only then, and after we called them out, ourselves and the Attorney General called them out, did they actually acknowledge that there was in fact a breach. So that was unfortunate and sad.
So you have a situation, you have a few situations here where you have individuals accessing their accounts they weren't supposed to. You have, this in this case here, we're talking about data breaches that legally they're supposed to report wasn't being reported. What is the remedy for that? I mean, obviously you referred to who you refer to. You can't really do anything. I guess, though, what I see a lot of and hear a lot of is a lot of frustration from individuals that when people like me or you as a citizen, not as a government worker, but as a citizen, are facing audits from the IRS or things like that, we have fines, we have this, we have that. We get punished when we don't follow the law.
True.
What happens when you have a situation like data breaches you're legally required to alert people to and you failed to do? What happens?
Well, I mean, from our standpoint, obviously
you're not an enforcement arm. All you can do is refer it.
We report on it if it's something that's referable. That particular instance, obviously the Attorney General already knew, the others knew. There's not a ton of teeth in the law in that regards. But the big thing you do is when the individual, the elected official, comes up next, make sure that they're not there. There's probably some additional responsibilities as well, but that's the biggest way to clean up the mess is don't reelect them. If they can't get the job done, don't reelect them.
Well, absolutely. But of course, one of the ways is knowing about the mess, and we all know how much some of the media and everything, a lot of things get lost, and in that,
well, and for some of the, the actual criminal aspects, and even some of the others, like we've got individuals over the years that fail to forward sales tax and fail to forward. Now there are some ramifications of that too, like people withholding for insurance and stuff like that. So we've had some referrals on that to different individuals, the Treasury, the retirement system, things like that. And some of that they will work through and they get resolved. But it was always interesting. One of my predecessors talked about how many people they had put in jail. Well, I always have to tell people the auditor doesn't put anybody in jail. Now we do referrals that do end up putting people in jail, but we ourselves are not, as you said earlier, we're not a law enforcement or an enforcement agency. We're a reporting agency.
So you're closing out your term here.
Yep.
A new auditor will be coming in, whether that is Allison Ball or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who the other person is. It's probably they're not going to win. Anyway, yes. So probably Allison Ball taking over. What is some advice you give? What is the number one thing, or to citizens that are looking at the auditor's office under a new hand? What should they be looking for out of that auditor's office? What do you think the greatest concern before Kentucky is that the auditor's office has to deal with?
Well, I think the things we've had to deal with, especially during my 2 terms, is one, make sure that we have the staffing that we needed. I've been blessed to have a great team. I consider my family. We were blessed. We actually launched and had for the first time our first group of interns started this year. So that was very exciting. A lot of energy, a lot of effort. And they just actually finished up. Actually, yesterday we had a little barbecue where we celebrated, and we had a couple people retiring as well. But it was important for that because it's getting harder and harder. There's not as many people going into the accounting profession, and then by extension, there's not as many available. So anything that we can do to make sure that people see the great work of the auditor's office, to see that it's important, because we've got to have people hold government accountable. And that includes us too, but you got to have people, because if you don't have anybody, I always say one of the biggest findings that we have, a lot of people overlook, it's called a lack of segregation of duties. And that just means that they don't separate each of the duties from receiving the money, creating the deposit, do it. And the story you always get is just, pick any name. Sarah's one of the most honest people She would never do anything, and Sarah probably won't. But if Sarah gets a drug problem or a sick child or something like that, and she can't
or if Sarah doesn't know how to do her job,
or Sarah doesn't know how to do
I mean, the some of this training, and you've seen it, is a telephone game. This is how we've always done it, or what have you, and then you walk in, it's just not proper process.
But the point being is, if you don't have somebody looking over somebody's shoulders, and that temptation comes and the opportunity comes, well, many times they'll succumb to it. So it's important for have us and others to be available. But I would just encourage the new auditor because I feel like we've left the agency better. You just tell everybody to follow the data, which is what we've done. We don't target anyone. We don't give anybody a pass. We just follow the data. If you got a Republican that's got a problem, then refer the Republican. If you got a Democrat, refer the Democrat. If you got an independent, just make sure that we continue to keep and I know Allison will continue to do that. And we've even put in place making sure that there's a lot of talk now about ESG, environmental social governments.
Well, now there's not, though.
There's not,
because, you know, they removed that term. We caught on to the term.
Yes,
if you remember, they came out and they said, we're removing that term.
Yes.
So they're just going to do what they always do, invent a new term.
Exactly.
That means the same thing. But
there are processes in place. Now, obviously the auditor's office can't drill down deep, but we also processes in place now to confirm whether or not that is something that they are actually looking at, to make sure that they're being fiduciaries when it comes to our retirement systems.
If there could be one law change or regulation change or what have you that affects the auditor's office, and you could snap your fingers and make it happen, what would you want? Would you want to be able to arrest people and prosecute them? Would you want this law change? What would you want?
You know, that's a good question. You know, I thought so much when it came, when I was running for governor, I thought so much about, improving our educational system and supporting law enforcement, things like that. And thinking about the auditor's office, we have done, a ton. What would I change, just automatically? Well, I'll tell you what I would do. There's some states that do this. I would have a uniform system of reporting receipts and expenditures. Now, we have that to a certain degree with the state, but like the counties, there are different ones. I had always wanted what's known as like a continuous audit. So in other words, that there is access to the systems. When I first came in, and there may still be, but I'm not aware of it, we actually had individuals that, were still doing all their books manually. As opposed to on a computer system.
Really?
And, yes. And so, matter of fact, it was kind of funny when I first got in, and I don't know if they were, in this particular one, if they were doing it manually, but I first got in, there was a sheriff that was complaining to me right before and right after I got elected. And he said, my audit was, and I don't know what it was, but it was just some outrageous amount. And I asked our auditors, well, what happened? What's the deal? And they said, well, he basically brought in a shoebox full of receipts and had not, gone through and done his financial statement, done everything. So
he called them keepers.
Yes,
his box of keepers,
pretty much. Yeah. Now, like in West Virginia, I think they have a uniform reporting. I believe Ohio. I think West Virginia actually gives them. Now, West Virginia auditor is kind of interesting because I had an opportunity to meet with him, and they actually do have law enforcement. And they're actually operate like the comptroller too, which is kind of strange. So, from the standpoint of my standpoint, that would probably be the big thing, have a uniform reporting system. It would probably make it. And we've done some things too, from the standpoint, as on my way out, we've been able to, and I've fought for this for 7 years and it's just now coming to fruition. We're going to make sure that all our auditors have a data analytic software where they can look at really every transaction, as opposed to, because auditing basically deals primarily with sampling,
right?
And so with this new software that some of the other states are using, we'll have a greater. That doesn't mean that we won't have cases where we just do sampling, but it will give us the opportunity, if we want to look at all transactions and try to see if there's any flags or variances. So I think this is going to hopefully put us even a leap ahead in the future.
Turning to the governor's election,
yes.
Obviously we've got Cameron coming out of the primary running against Beshear. I don't think you've been quiet about your support for Cameron.
Very much.
You're out there actively campaigning for him. Having audited the Beshear administration and looking, and also too, I'm sure audited parts of the Cameron office as you've gone through it as well. From your standpoint, your unique experience, why is it that you're supporting Cameron against Beshear?
Well, Cameron stands for everything that I stand for, not just because he is a Republican. I mean, that's a good factor because, when you sign on to run for governor, you pledge that you're going to support the Republican platforms. And of course, Republicans are pro-life. We're, supposed to be for smaller government, but Daniel's he's a man of faith. He's a man of character. He wants to make sure that our law enforcement, you know, that we cherish our law enforcement, that we work to make sure that we have safety. And, you know, and we also want to make sure that our kids are protected. Let our kids be kids. You know, quit robbing them of their innocence. I mean, the thing that blows my mind most about Beshear is Beshear vetoing, you know, Senate Bill 150, which is protecting our kids. I call it, you know, protecting our kids bill. I mean, back in my day, we would have never thought about the possibility of injecting our kids, you know, full of hormones and, you know, doing surgeries that are irreversible. I mean,
can I this is a little off what I was planning on doing.
Sure.
But I want to see here. Can I play you a video?
Sure.
From this is from Louisville. They're having a hearing in Jefferson County Public Schools about Senate Bill 150.
Yes.
And I don't want to tell you too much, but this is like a 30-second video.
Okay.
And I want to play it for you here and get your reaction. Like I said, this is coming out of pretty much nowhere on you. So let's see.
This is just like Fox News. You got to be ready for anything.
I know, right? Here we go.
My pronouns are they, them. I will be going into 4th grade at Goldsmith Elementary School. I live in District 3. Today, I would like to talk to you about trans rights, and I think that everyone should have a choice on how to be themselves. And I think I need your help. I want my teachers to respect my pronouns and let me be who I really am.
All right. So I wanted to show that to you and get your reaction. So we were talking about Senate Bill 150, talking about protecting kids.
Right.
There you've got a child who, I don't know if you caught what he said at the beginning there, but his pronouns are they, them.
They, them. Right.
He's going into 4th grade. It was a little quick there because he actually said his name in the testimony, but I cut his name out, you know,
very good,
in order before I shared the video.
True.
And so, and so he's saying Senate Bill 150 is awful. Just, it's not respecting me. And we hear that a lot, you know, us conservatives when we're out there and they say that, oh, you're being mean and awful. What do you say to this 3rd going into 4th grader and his or hers or this person's, I couldn't tell if it's a boy or girl, you know, what their biological gender was from that video. But what do you tell to this child's parents that feels that they want to go by they, them pronouns, they want to use different bathrooms than their biological sex, they feel like they're not being respected and that we're all super duper mean and awful for how we're treating them?
Well, I feel sad for the individual because, you know, their childhood, their innocence has been robbed. You know, they didn't come up with that of their own. You know, someone has guided them, whether it's at school or whether it's elsewhere. Someone has guided them. That kids just don't come up with it. A perfect example is, you know, it's a little different, but a perfect example is, you know, people always talk about how, you know, not me, but talk about, you know, kids don't need to have guns. And when I say gun, toy guns and stuff like that. But if you don't let a kid have a toy gun, especially a boy, they're going to figure out, have a stick or their finger or, you know, or something like that and make it like a gun. So you could tell that this individual had been coached in that regards. And now they probably believe that. And that's unfortunate. Why rob the children of their innocence? Let kids be kids. Let's get back to teaching, reading, writing, and arithmetic and not worry. And why should we, you know, I've heard Daniel Cameron say it time and time again, you know, Jason Glasscock, or now soon to be former education commissioner, you know, had said at one time that if teachers don't want to, you know, teach the pronouns, then they need to find another job. And Daniel Cameron has said, well, really, Jason Glasscock and Andy Beshear need to find a new job. So the good thing about Senate Bill 150, and I've had other, you know, teachers and individuals in education thank us for it, because it also provides protection from them from the bullying of people like Jason Glasscock.
Do you so you see that the Beshear campaign is obviously running away from his very liberal tendencies, which is I know, right? It is surprising to see them run away from surgeries, but in the same hand run into, you know, hormones and puberty blockers with open arms, ignoring the fact that, you know, the data says that in the general population in America, not Kentucky, but in America, general population, this includes, you know, your super liberal areas like California and New York, that about 65 to 70% of Americans disagree with giving children under the age of 16 hormones or puberty blockers. Now, if you move to Kentucky, I'm sure that number would be significantly higher. You know, so you see somebody who, like Beshear, who has such radical viewpoints on these items that doesn't align with Kentucky values, clearly. Why do you think he is in the polls, at least? I'm not saying he is, but in the polls, he's still polling with such higher approval rating, and he's neck and neck, or he's even slightly above Cameron in the polling right now? Why do you think that is, despite he quite clearly holds viewpoints that the vast majority of Kentuckians do not agree with?
Well, part of the problem is that, you know, it's just part of society from the standpoint of most people are not like political junkies like you and I. Most people are getting up, going to work, trying to take care of their family, and the only thing they see is an occasional blip on the news. And if all you do, especially if you're just watching local news, or if you're watching whether CNN, MSN, you know, whatever, MSNBC or whatever, you know, not everybody watches Fox in Kentucky, believe it or not, or you know, or any of the others.
Well, even if they watch Fox, they still, I mean, to your point, they're not talking about Kentucky issues.
They're not talking about Kentucky issues, you know, very rarely. So from a standpoint, people only see the one side of it, and it's really only until the election. I mean, let's just face it, not everybody follows politics. I still, to this day, I have people that are supportive of me that I've had one of two things. One, they didn't know that I was running because, you know, they supported me in other areas. And two, I had one person like 2 weeks after the election, I heard them you know, I said hi to them and everything, and I started to walk in, and I overheard him tell, I guess it was his girlfriend or wife or something, that's going to be our next governor. And it's like, you know, so people just aren't plugged in. Like,
maybe they just think Beshear's going to win, and then you run again in 4 years. I'm just,
well,
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
You know, we've got to get Daniel elected, because I mean, we'll survive, but we're not going to survive well if, you know, Governor Beshear gets elected again. And one of the other things that I was going to say, just jumping back just for a second in regards to audit,
sure.
I mean, this is like the dynasty, because one of our audits we had when I was first in, you know, looked back into, you know, Steve Beshear's administration in Kentucky Wired, and his former finance cabinet secretary, basically with one signature, took us from a $30 million investment with Kentucky Wired to a $1.5 billion investment, and is still bleeding out.
Well, and it was a horrible investment. Don't even get me started about Kentucky Wired investment.
Sorry, I mean, get started. But the point is,
Pete, for the cost of what we have left to pay, we could buy every household in Kentucky a Starlink system that costs $550 initial setup, and then it's like $80 a month normal internet price. Yeah, and you get broadband speeds, and they could all have internet tomorrow. They could all have internet tomorrow, but instead we have to build the hardwire that is old technology, because it cost us more to leave that darn contract than it does for us to complete it.
I know. And you know, and if we, you know, technically we don't have to pay those bonds, but if we don't and we default, then it runs our credit rating. And all that was done with one finance cabinet under Steve Beshear's signature. So, Didn't mean to get you stirred up, but it was important to talk about
me stirred up.
It's important to talk about the dynasty that it is, the Beshears, and it's important to remind people that neither one of them were that great for Kentucky. They have set us back. We could be so far ahead if it wasn't for 12 years. You can blame
Steve Beshear for a lot of our pension problems.
Exactly.
I mean, that goes without saying. And well, I think that's because, like I said, I mean, he's concerned about the next, and I don't think people understand the amount of communication he doesn't have. Like, I'm sure, having worked under Bevin and that communicative relationship you had with the governor's office compared to now, I'm sure it's vastly different.
Well, it's vastly different. And even though Steve Beshear had extreme problems, we talked about Kentucky Wire being one of them, he was actually much more, he communicated with the General Assembly much more than Andy Beshear did.
Yeah, because you worked with him in the General Assembly.
Yeah.
And that is one thing, too, as well, is that, I mean, I don't know, you probably didn't catch it. And, I just did an episode on it where the cabinet for Health and Family Services, what's his name, Friedman or Friedshire, Eric, he, they've got this issue going on with kids sleeping on the floors of offices. And the committee, the interim joint committee or interim statutory committee or what have you, that's overseeing the cabinet for Health and Family Services, they were in front of. And they were literally like, how long has this been going on? They're like, we've been tracking it a year. So it's been going on over a year that children have been sleeping in these offices. And they go, okay, what do you need to fix it? And he had nothing. They're like, do you need money? No, he didn't ask for money. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a solution. His literal plan was just continue to let them sleep in offices. He didn't even ask for a law change. He didn't ask for a new facility be built. He didn't ask for monetary. It just blew my mind.
Well, do you know
how incompetent are you?
Do you know what's even sadder in that regards? Is I don't know if you remember a few years back, they wanted to take away the contract from Sunrise Children's Home.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing about it is what people don't realize is that, yes, they have their own, religious guidelines on how they're going to operate their business, and they should be protected. But the thing about it is what they never talk about, not Sunrise, but what the cabinet never talks about is Sunrise Children's Home delivers the same and better services at 2/3 the cost of what they can in any of their other providers. And the reason that is because we do. Sunrise does have lots of donations. I mean, it used to be the Baptist Children's Home, but they have certain criteria that they have to follow, and the people that work for them have to follow. And the people that get hurt, if they had, it took all of us pushing to get them to make sure they followed the law and they actually did the contract.
Of course,
but it would have been the kids that got hurt even more than, and we'd had more kids sleeping in a building.
And I think that's, if I have to say, people ask me, what's your greatest complaint you have with the Beshear administration? I go right to how he treats children.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at, he shut down the schools, casting them back, I mean, years and years and years behind, caused skyrocketing suicidality amongst children, being out of schools, drug use, certainly amongst our youth, let alone, high school students too, as well, overdose deaths. That caused a large amount of, and then taking away from their community events, their sport outings. I mean, you couldn't play baseball. You couldn't go play baseball outside. Do you remember he took his kid to play travel ball out of state while other sports were being shut down? And he came under a lot of flack for that because he's taking his kid to sports he was shutting down. Anyways, I'm getting started now. But point is you have that. You have then his general behavior towards, and I think you hit upon it, these children that think they're born the wrong gender. I mean, that is gender dysmorphia. It is a mental illness. And to say, how we're going to treat that, we're going to give you drugs and chop off body parts. I mean, I can't think of anything more cruel. And now you take Sunrise, you take what's going on now with Cabinet for Health and Family Services. go to the juvenile detention centers.
Oh, I know.
Where he's storing male and female juveniles together and resulted in violent rapes. I mean, it's out of control when you look at his track record on children.
I know. I know.
Sorry, you got me going again.
No. That's I appreciate the opportunity because it's it's sad, and that's the other reason we got into this, because you asked me why Daniel Cameron should be governor, and that's why Daniel Cameron should be governor, because we've got to have people in place to stop that. And Daniel's got a good history at the Attorney General's office of putting good people in place, and he will do the same, I believe. And certainly they couldn't be any worse than what we have with Beshear, but Daniel will do a great job. I've had an opportunity to know Daniel and had an opportunity to know Mackenzie and their son Theodore. And I'll tell you two quick stories.
Sure.
In regards to Daniel. On the campaign trail, my wife ended up having a thyroid tumor. Thankfully, it wasn't cancer, and she had to have an operation to have it removed. Daniel and Mackenzie found out about it. I get a text from Daniel just out of the blue. What's your address? What's your favorite soup? And I was like, okay, you want my physical address or my mailing? And so I got that to him, and soup just appeared out of nowhere. Soup and some rolls and stuff like that. So so I saw him at Fancy Farm after that. I said, man, Lynn and I, we appreciate the soup you and Mackenzie had and the scent and everything. And then I jokingly told him, I said, but I don't know if I appreciate you trying to win my wife's vote with soup. And then the other thing that they did was sometimes as a candidate, you know this, your spouse has to go speak on your behalf. Well, Lynn was in Pikeville, and Daniel Cameron happened to be in Pikeville as well. I think I was in another county that night. And then I get a text from Daniel with pictures of Lynn, and he said, hey, man, your wife did exceptional. So that's just the type of character. Even though we were opponents,
right?
They were still very kind to us.
I had this experience with Cameron on the campaign trail that really struck me. And I don't know, it's just odd things that struck me, right? But it was, I don't know, I think we were a few weeks out from Christmas. And I had told him how I was planning on cooking a brisket. I don't know how we got on the conversation. We were talking about Christmas plans or Thanksgiving plans or what have you. And I was talking about how I was going to cook a brisket by digging a hole in the backyard and then lighting coals and then burying, the brisket in the ground and doing like a 5, 6 hour, 7 hour slow smoke in the ground. And it was like February. So it was like 2-3 months after this happened. And he just randomly, I'm just walking past him and goes, hey, Andrew, how'd that brisket turn out? And I'm like, I don't know why it just struck me that he remembered it, but I think it's because you and me both know, like we meet when you're on the campaign trail, you're meeting literally hundreds of people a day, right. Shaking hands, working the food lines, doing all these things, going around, meeting a lot of people. And the fact that he remembered that I buried a brisket in my backyard, I don't know. That just really struck me. I don't know why, but it's those strange, different things,
Well, he's got a good heart, and he's a good man, and so we need to get him elected.
So one more question for you, and we'll end on this. Okay. So you were in the House for quite some time.
13 years.
13 years. Last 8 years as auditor. Are you retiring, or do you think you're going to stay in politics? Do you think you're going to go private? What is in the future for Mr. Harmon here? Are we going to see your name on a ballot again? What are you planning?
Sadly, Mr. Harmon passed away a few years ago, but Mike, now my dad always said similar. But now, Mike is, in life, sometimes God tells us to go, and that's why I ran for governor. And sometimes he tells us to be still and listen. And right now we're in the being still and listen. So, I don't know, if, when Daniel wins, if there will be anything there in that regards. If there is, I would be humbly would love to serve in his administration. There may be other opportunities, and if it's not politics at all, then I'm sure God will call me into something else. But, I don't know. I had somebody ask me the other day, they said, Mike, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. God's been really good. God's been really good to me. I said, but it does feel weird. For the first time in 21 years, when I finish this term, I will not be an elected official. Now, I'm not defined by my elected office. I'm defined by my personal relationship with Christ. But it's just a weird feeling. It's just a really weird feeling.
Well, thank you for joining us. And anytime you want to come on again, just reach out to me. Obviously, I reached out to you here, but if you want to come on again, you got something you want to talk about, reach out to me. Thank you for joining us here today.
Perfect. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You take care.
Thanks. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Tune in tomorrow for another episode of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Have a great rest of your day.